This episode of On the Beat is brought to you by Ingles. Shop online with Ingles Curbside Pickup. New curbside stores opening every week. Please welcome Mike Griffith.
Well, hey everybody, Mike Griffith here, and welcome to tonight's Ingles on the Beat segment. You can see I've got my Mercedes-Benz Stadium background going. Of course, Georgia has to finish things up first with Georgia Tech at noon on Saturday at Sanford Stadium, but it's kind of hard not to look ahead to Georgia LSU. We'll talk a little bit about that game today, but I want to bring you the news from Kirby Smart first. A.D. Mitchell, the dynamic receiver, this is going to be another plus when he comes back. I'm assuming that AD will be back this season. Now, you remember he got injured the second game of the year with that high ankle sprain, and he tried to come back for the Auburn game, re-injured it. That was in October. So high ankle sprains are different. In some ways, they're worse than breaks because you can't just do that surgery, right? It has to heal, and it's a very slow process. So Georgia has been out without their best feature receiver all season long. Ladd McConkey, I think he's done a whale of a job. He played through a foot injury earlier. He's finally getting back up to speed. You've seen Marcus Rosemy at Jack Saint. He's done some nice things, more of a possession guy. Dominic Blaylock, not really a three-down player. He can't really block, not a real physical guy. He's done some nice things on third downs. And you see Dylan Bell emerge. But there's no question if Georgia can get an A.D. Mitchell back at 100%, and it probably won't be clicking in time for the SEC title game, but certainly there's reason to believe he could be back in 100% for the semifinal, which could take place in Mercedes-Benz Stadium if it's the Peach Bowl, or if something crazy happens and Georgia gets shipped out west to the Fiesta Bowl, which is played in Glendale, Arizona. I don't think that's going to happen. Then, of course, the CFP championship game, January 9th, and that will be in Los Angeles at SoFi Stadium this year. So today, Kirby Smart updating us, telling us that, yes, A.D. Mitchell's kind of working out on the side, but he has not been working out with the team yet. And so Kirby didn't know how that was going to flow into this week. My guess is that they probably wouldn't trot him out there for Georgia Tech. If anything, LSU at the earliest, and even then I would say he would be on a snap count because it does take time to get back into football shape and get that timing back. So that's the update there. Jalen Carter, I brought this up to Kirby Smart today. Jalen Carter just keeps impressing me more and more and more. When he played 48 snaps against Tennessee, I said, oh my gosh, that's an amazing number. He's never going to play more than 30 again. He's a defensive tackle. I just don't think you're going to use. And sure enough, he played 40 the next week against Mississippi State. And I said, okay, well, they must have felt they really needed him. Surely he's not. He played 46 this last week for Georgia at Kentucky. So I asked Kirby about that today. I said, what does that say about the level of buy-in that guys in your program have when they're playing over 40 snaps? A guy like this who's on the verge of generational wealth, and he's putting himself out there. And Kirby said, well, you know, you say that he's risking generational wealth. I say that he's building it. He said, you know, because Jalen's got to show these NFL teams that he's got the stamina and wherewithal to play this number of snaps in the league because he hasn't really ever done that before. And I hadn't really thought about that. And Kirby's right. You know, you think about Jalen and as a freshman and Jalen last year as a sophomore, and he was playing behind Jordan Davis and Devontae Wyatt, and he never really had to play this number of snaps. So the NFL's got questions. Can this guy play this number of snaps? And so far, he's proven that he can. I think he's also strengthening his case as an Outland Trophy finalist. Right now, he's a semifinalist. I think he's making a big push to become a finalist. And I know it's not about individual awards, but it's always good to see the Georgia players get recognition. Obviously, you saw last year Jordan Davis won that award, and that helps you recruit when you have players that are recognized as the best linemen in the nation. It shows how they're being developed in the Georgia program. So I thought that was interesting. Plenty of talk today about Georgia Tech at the Georgia press conference. Brent Key, a guy that Kirby Smart said he played against. Brent Key played at Georgia Tech. Kirby noted that when you play at a school and that's your alma mater, it just means a little bit more to you. And he's been impressed with what Brent Key's done. I mean, the Yellow Jackets have won 4 out of 7 games since Key took over the program after 4 games this year, when you saw Collins get fired after a 1-3 start, and a couple of top 25 wins. Beat Pitt in his first game, and then most recently, and this definitely gets Georgia's attention, they were able to beat North Carolina in Chapel Hill last Saturday. So the Yellow Jackets are going to come into Sanford Stadium. They're a 33-point underdog, but I guarantee you they're not looking at it like that. Like, they're playing for something. They're 4-3 under this coach. They want to go to a bowl game desperately. They're going to be looking for the upset at Sanford Stadium. And you say it can't happen, and maybe it can. But I think this game could be tough. I think it's going to be physical. I think Georgia has Georgia Tech outmanned, but I don't think you're going to see 45-0 like you did last year. Georgia has dominated this series, 17 wins in the last 20 games. Of course, the last time Tech won, it was Kirby Smart's first season as head coach in 2016. This is the first time the teams have played in Sanford Stadium since 2018. The 2020 game that was supposed to be scheduled in Sanford Stadium got canceled because, as you recall, in that COVID year, the SEC didn't play any non-conference games, conference games only. So there was no Georgia Tech game in 2020. Important to note that. Taking a look around at the college football playoff picture, and man, I've written a lot about this, and I watched this all weekend long. And when Georgia beat Kentucky 16-6, a lot of people said, man, that was not the most impressive win for the Bulldogs, right? They wanted to see, blow them out, take care. When you looked at all the games, Michigan had to come from behind at home to beat Illinois, get a little help from the officials late. Ohio State had to come from behind on the road at Maryland. This is a school they regularly trounce. You saw USC in an epic back and forth with UCLA on the road in the Rose Bowl. And, of course, TCU, you saw the very end, running on the field and kicking that last second field goal to beat Baylor. Those are teams 2, 3, 4, and 5. And they all had to come from behind. And suddenly, Georgia's 16-6 win over Kentucky didn't look so bad compared to what some of those other teams had to go through. Clemson won decisively. I think Clemson is still on the outside looking in. They need somebody to lose, maybe two teams to lose. Tennessee, though, they're out. You saw them get eliminated by South Carolina the other night. Big win for the Gamecocks and Shane Beamer under the lights in the SEC. I've said this before. Anything can happen under the lights in the SEC on the road. And Tennessee fell victim to that. Also, Tennessee quarterback Hendon Hooker. I'm not going to call it a career-ending injury because I think he's going to play in the NFL, but a collegiate career-ending ACL injury in that game against South Carolina. Late in the game had been decided, but you hated to see Hendon Hooker go down. Kind of sad ending for Hendon Hooker. This is a guy that is in my top 3 in my Heisman consideration right now, and I'm kind of thinking he'll probably still be, but I don't know. I need to see how things play out. It's very fluid for me as a Heisman Trophy voter. I'm one of these guys. I want to see what happens on Championship Saturday. I mean, I've kind of got an idea. Of course, C.J. Stroud, and of course, Caleb Williams, and I haven't forgotten Stetson Bennett. But let's see what they do on that final Saturday on December the 3rd when they play in these championship games, or December the 2nd. I believe the Pac-12 championship game might be Friday night. So let's see how they end the season. Let's see if anybody else emerges, right? I saw that the Michigan running back Blake Corum injured, right? How bad is he? Is he out for the year? This is a guy that also, was, I think, getting some Heisman consideration. So, but as far as the playoff picture goes, when the rankings come out, Georgia 1, Ohio State 2, Michigan will be 3. Of course, only one of those two teams will get in. I think they'll still have TCU 4 on the strength of their schedule. They played a very difficult schedule, and USC 5. And then 6 is probably LSU with 2 losses. And then 7, I think Clemson. I think Clemson's made a move, and I think Clemson's going to jump Alabama. Alabama wasn't real impressive against Austin Peay, and Clemson was impressive against Miami. And yes, I do realize that when you're ranking the teams, you have to consider the body work for the season. But we're really talking about is who's playing the best right now. And as long as you don't have 3 or 4 losses or 2 losses like LSU, and let's face it, the only reason LSU's still in it is because they have a chance to knock off Georgia. And I'm still not completely convinced that they would get in. They probably would get in if they beat Georgia in the SEC championship game. But as things stand, I do think that, I do think Georgia's going to win out. So that's 1. I'm going to pick Ohio State to win out for this scenario. That'll be 2. I'm going to say I think TCU is going to win out. That's 3. TCU plays host to Iowa State this weekend, and then they'll probably play Kansas State, maybe Texas, but probably Kansas State in the Big 12 championship game. So I think TCU's in. So that's 3. So who's that fourth team? You have a one-loss Michigan. Well, their schedule strength is the second worst among the FBS schools, non-conference, only to UCLA. Those two teams played the worst non-conference schedules in the country, according to ESPN metrics. So Michigan, with one loss, they're out. I think then you got to look at Clemson. I think Clemson, if they win the ACC championship, and it didn't help them that North Carolina lost to Tech, they kind of wanted North Carolina to be a top 10 team that would have really boosted their resume. But North Carolina is still in the top 25. I think Clemson, if USC loses one of these next two games, I think Clemson is the benefactor that gets in, unless Michigan beats Ohio State. And I'll cover that in a second. But you take a look at what USC's got to do. And they got to come home and play Notre Dame this Saturday. And that's going to be a tough game. Even if they win, Notre Dame's going to take a piece of them physically. The following week, if Oregon beats Oregon State, which I think Dan Lanning and Bo Nix will, then USC is going to have to play Oregon. And I don't think USC will beat Oregon. I really don't. So for my scenario, I've got USC losing one of the next two games and nobody from the Pac-12. And I've got Clemson sliding in. Now, how does that change? If Michigan goes to Ohio State and beats the Buckeyes, and I think whoever wins the Michigan-Ohio State game will win the Big Ten championship. Because if you take a look at the teams that are vying for that game over there, they all have 3 losses or more. I think it's Iowa and Purdue, the two most likely. I don't think either one of those teams can stay on the field with Michigan or Ohio State. But let's say Michigan beats Ohio State. Then Michigan would win the Big Ten. And Michigan's in, right? They control their own destiny. A one-loss Ohio State could trump a one-loss Clemson because Ohio State beat Notre Dame at the start of the year. And Notre Dame recently beat Clemson. Now, transitive properties aren't always in play. But in this case, I do believe they would take a one-loss Ohio State that does not play in the Big Ten championship game over a one-loss Clemson that wins the ACC. That's just me spitballing it for you. Listen, if USC wins out and TCU wins out, then we're not even having a conversation because they control their own destiny. If USC and TCU win out, they're in. Obviously, the Ohio State-Michigan winner, and they win the Big Ten title, they're in. Obviously, Georgia, they're in. Now, I've had a couple of people ask me, well, does Georgia get in if they lose? Let's not, go there because it's possible they could get left out and people start throwing things going, wait a minute, no way, they're one of the 4. If everybody else is conference champions, right? If Ohio State, Michigan winner is a conference champion and TCU is a conference champion, undefeated conference champion, and USC is a conference champion, if LSU beats Georgia, shouldn't LSU get that 4th spot over Georgia? And you may say, well, LSU's got 2 up, but they beat Georgia in the championship game. It becomes a de facto playoff game. Now, I think Georgia's better than it. I think if LSU beat Georgia, it would be the 1 out of 10 times. I think if they play the game 10 times, Georgia wins it 9 times. But what if, right? What if? So that's a scenario that's out there. I don't think you need to worry about it. I think Georgia's going to take care of business against Georgia Tech. I don't think they're going to win by 33, but I think they're going to win decisively enough. Now, about the college football playoffs, I do think that Georgia is going to win out and be the number 1 seed. I also think that the Ohio State-Michigan winner is going to win out and be the 2 seed. And I now think that TCU is going to win out and be the 3 seed. They play Iowa State at home, and then they play in the Big 12 championship game, likely against Kansas State, maybe Texas. But I think they win that game. So that's your top 3. I don't think USC is going to win out. USC has to play host to Notre Dame, and even if they win that game, they probably got to play Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game. Oregon, maybe outside chance Utah. Oregon just needs to beat Oregon State. And I think Oregon can beat USC. So for my scenario, I knock them out. Well, now who gets in? I think Clemson, as a conference champion with 1 loss, has a very good chance of getting in if either TCU or USC loses. I think Clemson's on deck. Unless if Michigan beats Ohio State and Ohio State is the 1 loss, I think Ohio State gets in over Clemson because Ohio State beat Notre Dame earlier this year and Notre Dame just beat Clemson, right? So then I think you apply those transitive properties. It gets really messed up if LSU beats Georgia. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it would only happen 1 out of 20 times if they played. But if it happened, I'm not sure Georgia gets in. even with one loss, because then you'd have a Big Ten champion with one loss that won a championship game. You'd have a Big 12 champion that's undefeated in TCU. If USC runs the gauntlet and has one loss, they're a champion. Could you leave out LSU if they beat Georgia head-to-head? I think Georgia's a better team, but they'd settle in on the field, right? I don't think that's going to happen. I think Georgia's going to dominate that football game. I want to take a break right now. I want to recognize our sponsor, Ingles. They've been incredible. I want to thank Ingles. When we come back after this break, we're going to be joined by Jeremy Pruitt. Stay with us.
Did you know that Ingles sells more organics than any other store? Or that they run their own dairy? Or that they only serve USDA choice and prime meat? Did you know that they have more local craft beer than any place else? Or that they have Energy Smart stores? Or that they professionally slice and package imported cheese from Europe? Did you know about their giant international aisle, local farm partnerships, curbside pickup, wine department? Or that they donate 3,956 meals a day to local food banks? Well, now you do. It's all in the bag. Ingles, low prices, love the savings.
Well, welcome back to the program. And as promised, Jeremy Pruitt joins us now. Coach Pruitt, really appreciate the time. And I guess we'll start out reflecting on that Georgia-Kentucky game. I know a lot of Georgia fans were disappointed it was only 16-6, but boy, I saw a smash-mouth football game and a fired-up Kentucky team.
Well, I think if you look at it, you talk about 4 SEC games in a row, the last 2 being on the road in very cold conditions. I thought Georgia did what they had to do to win the game. They could have punched one in down there one time on the goal line, but Kirby decided to go for it, and which is going to make them have to go 99 yards. So I like the call. But I thought it was a dominating performance.
Yeah, I thought so too. And Georgia really, careful with the play calling. Stetson nearly threw a pick 6 there in the third quarter. I noticed after that, there were 18 play calls and 17 of them were runs, right? Kirby Smart was not going to let the quarterback or the win situation beat him. As long as they were controlling the game with their defense, there was no reason for Georgia to take chances. Make Will Levis in Kentucky take chances, and they did. And give Will Levis credit. He obviously showed why he's a first-round pick. Let's move on now. The Tennessee game, 63-38. I mean, I don't know that anybody saw that coming. I will say this. Football is obviously a game of matchups, Coach. And if there's one thing South Carolina, or 2 things they have, it's a decent secondary and some pretty good receivers. And you just wondered if Spencer Rattler could put it together. What was your thoughts on that Tennessee-South Carolina game?
Well, I think start with Shane Beamer and his offensive staff, what they did offensively, creating the explosive plays, throwing a lot of balls on first down, converting third downs. I think there was a time they were like 6 for 6. And then finding ways to get in the Wildcat, mix the run game up with 2 of their best running backs out of the game. I thought it was an excellent game plan. Unfortunately, Tennessee was playing well offensively. They just couldn't keep up. And then obviously the injury to Hendon Hooker did not help things in the end.
Yeah, really unfortunate. You hate to see that happen. We talked about that first segment. Hendon Hooker having a great season. One of the guys I've got in my Heisman consideration, just having a storybook season. Did a lot for Tennessee. Really kind of helped Tennessee capture some momentum. And now they got to start on next year. They got to look at this as the beginning of next year with this quarterback, Joe Milton, against Vanderbilt. Because Vanderbilt, Coach, Florida found out real fast, went up to Nashville and got beat. And then you see Ole Miss get beat at Arkansas. How much of this is really all about engagement and what teams are still engaged at this stage of the season?
Well, I think both of those games, you see 2 teams that you feel like were upset, were on the road. 3 teams. When you count Tennessee in there.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at this league, we've talked about it early on this season, how deep the SEC is, how competitive, and then just the grind of the season. And you start playing 3-4 games in a row in the SEC, and they're on the road. It's tough to win, which to me speaks about Georgia. Georgia continues to find a way. You can't apologize for what a lot of fans would say is an ugly win. Hey, I guarantee Georgia checked that one off, and they moved on to Georgia Tech when they got on the plane.
Yeah, no doubt about it. They got on the plane without any serious injuries as well. And Jalen Carter continues to star 46 snaps for that defensive tackle, really wreaking havoc on the defense. And I asked Kirby about that today. I said, what does that say that a guy like Jalen is out there still engaged when he's on the verge of generational wealth? And Kirby said, well, he's building it right now. There's, as you've said on earlier programs, there's a big difference between being the number 2 and number 3 pick and being 10 or 11. And NFL teams right now are seeing that Jalen Carter can play over 40 snaps and sustain and be effective. And that's a big factor in the league. And you've been at Kirby's side for 6 years at Alabama. You've coached your own program at Tennessee. I mean, we know that they are focused on winning the game. We understand that first and foremost. But right now, these guys are also kind of polishing off the NFL draft tapes as well.
Well, if you look at these guys, I mean, it's a job interview, and they're playing football, right? So the best way to build your resume is to play, and Jalen Carter is obviously doing that. He's becoming, has been, and kind of reasserted himself as the most dominant interior defensive lineman in the country.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Now let's take a look ahead to next week's games. Ole Miss and Mississippi State, the Egg Bowl. A lot of people think this might be one of the dirtiest, games out there. I mean, these teams obviously don't like one another. A lot of animosity between Ole Miss and Mississippi State. You kind of look where the teams are at. Mike Leach's teams had a pretty good season. They're a pretty tough team. I look at Ole Miss, and they've had some real highs. They've reached in the top 10, and then they lose to Bama. They didn't appear engaged against Arkansas. How tough is it to get the momentum back? And do you think that it was a distraction, all the talk about Lane Kiffin going to Ole Miss? Going to Auburn.
Right. So, when it comes to the Egg Bowl, a lot of those kids on both teams are going to be Mississippi kids. Obviously, Ole Miss has a lot more portal kids, so there's probably going to be kids from outside the state. When it comes to rivalry games, it's about what this game means to you. So it's going to be on a short week. Now, I like Mississippi State in this game. I really do. I like the way they play on defense. I think they'll create some issues for Ole Miss. And they've been a dangerous team all year. So I think Mississippi State has got a chance to upset Ole Miss.
Yeah, Josh Heupel with quite a job on his hands now. Got to pick this Tennessee team up. Such a tough loss. Knocks them out of the playoff. You lose your quarterback, Hendon Hooker. I know I say, all you got to do is just make it look like next year. Well, that sounds good to me. But Jeremy, there's a lot of those kids, and you know them. You recruited some of them. You coached most of them. This is it for them. There is no next year. There's a lot of older guys on that Tennessee team. How do you think they're going to respond in Nashville under the lights next Saturday night?
Well, they'll be ready to play. I think if you look at that team, there's a lot of experience on the team. And they can't let one game beat them twice. So they've got to respond. And I think when you look at the character of the team, how they've responded this year and over the last couple of years, I see these guys responding in Nashville and playing well.
And on the next game, we've got LSU's playing A&M, and A&M finally won a game. Not real impressive, though. They played UMass, maybe the worst team in the FBS ranks, and it was not a convincing win. I think they only 21-3. It was not overly impressive, but it was a win. They did taste win again at home. They've got LSU at home. I wonder if there's some added motivation under the lights in College Station. They get a chance to beat the SEC West Division winner versus an LSU team. Had a little bit of a battle against UAB before they finally pulled away. How do you see LSU and Texas A&M matching up and playing out in College Station?
Well, I continue to be impressed with the job that Brian Kelly's doing. He's taken a team of that, probably the most improved team in the country. I would say them and Florida State, when you look at how they played at the beginning of the year and where they're at right now. I kind of like the Texas A&M, a couple of weeks ago, possibly with an upset, but just watching how Brian Kelly's had his LSU team ready to play. I see them finishing this off the right way and getting ready for Georgia in the SEC championship game.
Yeah, it's hard to pick against the Bayou Bengals. A lot of momentum there, and Brian Kelly, the culture has changed. And as you said earlier on our program earlier this year, he's only going to get more talent. They're only going to get better and tougher. Now, Georgia Tech, you've been a part of this rivalry. You were on the Georgia football staff, and I got to ask you, how does this one stack up? Because I know the popular thing to say is, oh, yeah, this is great. I've looked at it as an outsider and said, I don't get it. I don't know why you play it. I don't know I understand they're in state, but if it's a good game, that means they're good enough to beat you. They can recruit against you. I don't like when it's played. Back when it was originally scheduled way back when, there was no SEC champion. I look at this as like, play this at the beginning of the year. I'd rather see an SEC game. Maybe you get a South Carolina team that's fat and happy right now. But I guess your general thoughts on the rivalry and then this matchup in particular with Brent Key. he just beat North Carolina.
Well, obviously, this is important to a lot of old school folks. Georgia Tech, Georgia, it's huge rivalry over the last several years. Really, since Kirby's been there, it's not been much of a game. Georgia has really done a nice job dominating the game. I think this game's interesting in the fact that, with this win last week at North Carolina, and you look what Brent Key has done over the last several weeks, he's got a chance to get this job. And I think it would. I think playing Georgia tough in this game would really maybe move the momentum for him to secure this job. I mean, you can't look. I mean, look what he's done. I think he's done a heck of a job. But obviously, when they roll out there on the field, Georgia's going to have a lot more talent. But I believe Georgia's going to continue to do what they've done all year. They're going to be prepared. They're going to have a really good week of practice, and you're going to kind of see the Bulldogs continue to march on.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Kirby Smart has kept these guys very focused. They understand they don't have the margin for error that last year's team did with 15 NFL draft picks and 5 first-rounders. This is a team that's had to get better from week to week. I think they can learn something, Coach, from that game at Kentucky. And albeit, I know they put it behind him in one sense, but in another sense, I do think it brings a sense of urgency, and it reminds you that, hey, guys, if we don't play well, we can get beat. I got to think that might have kind of spark that sense of urgency when Kentucky's able to play you that close.
Well, I think at this point in the season, if you look at those guys that are in the program, there's still a lot of experience at Georgia, especially going into the 12th game of the season. The culture that's there, every Monday they start over, and that's coming from the head football coach. We talked about it before the season started. Kirby Smart, his experience coming off a national championship season, I think he's continued to get his guys to be at their best and find a way. And I think we'll continue to see that again this week.
Sounds crazy that we've waited this long to bring up the Alabama-Auburn game. To me, for years and years and years, I believe it's the best rivalry in college football. I know this year Alabama out of playoff contention. Auburn's had a challenging year. Cadillac Williams on the sideline. Maybe that outside shot at an interim tag and holding the job a little bit longer. It seems far-fetched to me, but you just never know. What do you make about Auburn and Alabama? I know they say throw the records out. Could Auburn surprise? Do they have enough? Especially with Bama, started a little sluggish last week against Austin Peay.
I think Auburn's done a nice job in the last 3 games, just trying to create an identity offensively and defensively. They're much improved. Since Cadillac has taken over, you see a lot of fight and belief. And then, again, like you said, throw the records out. It's Auburn, Alabama, but it's in Tuscaloosa. It's been a while since Auburn's won one down there. So I think it'll be a slugfest for about a half, but I think in the end, the team that's got the best players will win this one.
And I've seen that play out. We got Michigan, Ohio State. I know you've already told us you're not interested. You don't watch a whole lot of Big Ten football. Somebody's going to win that game. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen, though. They're going to build this game up so much, and they're going to talk about, could the winner of this game be the number 1 seed? The answer is no, but you're going to hear that all weekend long. You're going to hear Big Ten propaganda, and this is one more reason why I don't think Georgia should be playing Georgia Tech, because you can't get anybody's attention and anybody's eyes playing this game like you would if it was a conference foe. But you're going to hear all about that. I'm not even going to bother to ask you about that one because I think it's a coin toss game. But I do want to ask you if you think TCU and USC are going to finish their gauntlet. TCU against Iowa State at home, and then they play likely Kansas State in the Big 12 title game, UCLA at home against Notre Dame, and then probably Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks in the Pac-12. Do you think both those teams are going to finish and run the gauntlet and win their leagues, or do you think we're going to see an upset, one of those two teams upset in the next couple of weeks?
I think TCU has the best chance. When you look at USC playing Notre Dame and then whoever they got in the Pac-12 championship game, I think it's going to be tough on them. I think TCU has won a lot of close games this year and continue to find a way. I like TCU to I guess I would say that I think they have the best chance, Mike, TCU, of possibly running the gauntlet, in my opinion. Not to say that USC cannot, but I look for one or both of those teams to get a loss down the stretch.
Clemson is a team, I said earlier when I broke this down, that if one of those two teams loses, provided Ohio State beats Michigan, right, I think Clemson could get in the back door. And would they deserve that? I mean, you went up against enough Clemson teams, and I know this year Clemson has not always looked good, but if Clemson runs the table and wins the conference championship game, and either TCU or USC trips up, right, and Ohio State beats Michigan, because Michigan's non-conference schedule, second worst among FBS schools in the country. I think Clemson slips in, and a lot of people are already apologizing, saying they don't deserve it. Haven't really heard your thoughts on Clemson and Dabo Swinney.
Well, I've not watched them here much lately. I know early in the season they really struggled offensively, trying to figure out who's going to be the quarterback for them. I do believe that they've got really good players on defense. Playing North Carolina, it probably hurt them a little bit in the eyes of everybody with Georgia Tech beating North Carolina. But now it might have helped them with South Carolina beating Tennessee the way they did. So, Clemson to me is, if they win out, they're sitting right there waiting for one of those other three teams or two teams to slip up, and they very, very well could slide in there. I think a lot of it depends on the game between Ohio State and Michigan. Who's the winner and what does the game look like?
Jeremy, do you like all this chaos? Do you like it that it's this loose and there's this many teams, or did you prefer the old BCS style where it was all a numbers game? And do you look forward to the 12 teams? Because just imagine how many teams would still be engaged if we were talking about a 12-team playoff.
Well, it all depends. If you're Georgia, you like 4-team. If you're 12, right? So I think it all depends. I think it's going to be good for college football, just the excitement. I don't believe you can argue that the 12-team playoff, it'll be good for college football. Will there be some teams that probably shouldn't be in there? Possibly, but look at this year. I mean, there's a lot of 2-loss teams in there. And as we go down the stretch, it would be crazy if we tried to pick out 12 teams to play in this playoff. It
really would. I do those rankings every week. You'd see Alabama probably playing some, a group of 5 team in Tuscaloosa, and God only knows what would happen. Jeremy, we want to thank you for joining the program. Want to thank our sponsor, Ingles. Want to thank you for joining us as well. Don't forget, Wednesday night, it's Jeff Santel before the hedges, and then Friday night, our Go With The Flow picks, and Georgia finishes off the regular season against Georgia Tech on noon on Sunday. And then next week, we're going to have all sorts of fun coverage on the SEC championship game. It's LSU, it's Georgia, 4 p.m., December 3rd, that building right behind me, Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Have a great Thanksgiving and a great week, everybody.